Welcome to Afterthoughts, everybody. This is the podcast where we watch something and give you our thoughts after we've done it. But, this time around, this episode's a little bit different. We got a co-host that's MIA, and we really don't have a whole lot to necessarily directly recommend or refute. So this episode kind of falls under one of our dustier formats, which we, I think, had for maybe 2 episodes at the beginning of this, and even before
which is the John and Ryan got left alone.
Yes, that's right. John and Ryan are now off-roading into different conversations. That is correct. So we pulled a different format off the shelf. We blew the dust off it. Whew, there it goes. And we now have read the text of this. And it says it's either off the table or it's a topic talk or it's some other shit that never fell into a recommend or refute or a specific movie. And joining me on this journey, as he mentioned already, is co-host Ryan King.
Yep. Definitely looking forward to talking about some horror movies. I mean, it's October. Yeah. I was struggling this time, to come up with what to watch. I know Schlocktober is your thing, but I do really like horror movies, and I try to get some interesting perspectives in October, but I feel like I kind of done it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, why Schlocktober has become my thing, because I knew that you were going to eventually run out of fuel, but I am here to stay. And
we'll see about Christmas movies.
I would also say that Schlocktober doesn't have to be my thing. To quote Bane from Dark Knight Rises, I want to give it back to you, the people. Anybody who wants to take it on is welcome to do so.
Please. Yeah. By week 3, John's just...
I'm so lonely and nobody's there to talk to me about the stuff I've seen. Oh my God. But with it being spooky season and trying to figure out, what are we going to watch? What are the elements of horror? I figured with this would be a prime kind of episode to have just a brief discussion, a recap, maybe not brief, but a good discussion with you, Ryan, about what movies are you thinking about when it hits Halloween season. We can talk a little bit about some of the elements that make a good horror film if we really want to. Some of the ones that are out right now, some of the ones we're thinking about revisiting, especially now that you have kind of drained the well of good franchises and you're now scraping the bottom of the barrel as I have been doing. So let's recap your merits here. Let's count your stars. How many Scouts badges have you gotten for your different franchises? What you did Halloween, right? I think you did Halloween.
I've watched, I would say when you talk about what do you watch around October, I love the Halloween franchise, even the fucking terrible ones. Not so much the newer ones, not the Rob Zombie things, but the the classic, especially the first Halloween, I do think is really great.
That and any of the ones where they're trying to figure out what the franchise is and how they can make money off of it before they got into the nostalgia, member berries, social commentary shit.
Friday the 13th is the next one in that same vein, and I like both of those when they get into the movies where it isn't Jason, it isn't Myers. It turns out it's some other random asshole or whatever.
Yeah. Just anybody who could pick up a machete and a hockey mask.
Right. Or some kind of random, when they get weirdly supernatural.
Yeah. When they come back from the dead. That was, our buddy Jim was talking about how he wished he could watch Hellraiser. And I was like, hey, you're talking to a guy who's seen all 11 of them, except for the Hulu one. I guess I haven't seen the 12th now.
Oh yeah.
But, I was like, which one do you want to know about? Maybe you, me, and Dixon. I kept trying to talk Dixon into watching the 4th one with me and Jim, because that's the one where they go to space and they have Adam Scott as a Frenchman. But it was like both Jim and Dixon were like, no, not at all. I think Jim would be more down for it. But I love when those classic horror films just they go bonkers. They don't fucking know what they're doing. They're just like, maybe the fans will give a shit about this, or they get us. I don't even know what a screenplay writer's thinking of when they do that shit. Oh, it's a voodoo curse. How does it translate into the 20th century?
Honestly, it kind of doesn't matter. I think that's where some of this, where it's interesting to talk about horror is it's a pretty marketable way to make a movie and just get money if you can get the right thing out there. Either you sell it through like buzz, social media, whatever now, or it's a franchise that worked and you just crack out shit. And honestly, people show up even after they've seen bad ones of that franchise. And they get tired of other stuff, but they still watch some of these franchises way after they're dead.
Latch onto like names too, and like that can make money, like name recognition, not even brand recognition, but just name recognition. Like Amityville has so many fucking offshoots that aren't like, because it's a town, you can't officially license it. And you just have so many people being like, what could possibly be haunted and also happen to be in this fucking New England town? I don't know, maybe like a clock. Maybe a fucking ham sandwich, the Amityville ham sandwich, Hamityville. That's what it's called.
It sat out Hamityville. It sat out too long.
And you get like those kind of, it becomes parody, it becomes schlock, it becomes this like Exorcist has Exorcist Believer now, where the tropes have been derived too and like just overridden with fucking audiences just want to see somebody scream into a camera and they want to see it this way. It's kind of sad to see like contemporary horror anyway, take it that direction of like what an audience wants to see versus when it was more confused, I guess, when like executives didn't know or didn't think that they knew. They had no confidence in what would make people, I don't even know if it's scared. I just think it's like enjoy the horror aspects of it. It's like a few little spooky jumps in like a Jason thing, but then he bashes a kid against a tree with in a fucking sleeping bag. And something about that is like hilarious and insane.
Yeah. That's when it goes off the rails like that. It's great. No, I'm just like glancing over and I'm like, even I don't know, I like to rag on the Conjuring universe.
Well, yeah, it's hard not to because the Conjuring universe is very much like, in this house, so and so happened, and then you get like a sting, and the formula is already still there. The cinematography is great, and the actors are bringing some energy to it. It's not amateur hour in like the 70s, but it's still.
But like looking at it, none of them have touched what the Conjuring did at the box office.
Yeah,
but they've lowered the budget, so I think some of them are more profitable.
Yeah,
probably.
They rein it in. they can tell more intimate stories now, quote unquote.
Yeah, the last one that's like technically in the universe. Actually, surprised they haven't made some in a bit.
Is it the Annabelle?
Is it an Annabelle or whatever? Well, the Curse of the La Llorona was technically in that. But it only had a budget of $9 million, and it made $54 million.
Damn!
If you could just crap out shit. And it's the 15th movie, and you don't even have Conjuring in the title, and people show up to see it. Like
that just reminds me, like Blumhouse. Blumhouse is notorious for cranking out just random horror shit and turning a profit. Like they're technically cinematic heroes in a way because they're still perpetuating like, hey, low budget, high profit sort of mentality, but that means you're getting a shotgun spread of like schlock. There's not a whole lot of thought being put into what the low budget features are. They're just like, just fucking crank it out, get it into Hulu, do whatever. Right. And I recently was looking through, I think maybe it was HBO Max, and I was like, oh, there's a TV series called The Cabin in the Woods. And I was like, oh, could that be like an anthology, like the Joss Whedon fucking movie? That sounds awesome. I looked at it.
Yeah.
And then I watched the first episode and I was like, this is true crime. This is just a true crime documentary series that Blumhouse produced. And they put creepy stings in it and they put ghost adventures and they did like fucking Zach Baggins level editing for some of this shit and put some dramatizations. And I was like, this is not what I want. This is not what I wanted this to be. Very, very fucking disappointing. But I mean, like, what do I guess that brings me to an interesting question that I've always been exploring as of recent, especially. But like, what do you want in a horror movie? Like, what do you look for now, Ryan? Like when you're sifting either through classics or if you're looking at a contemporary horror film, like what do you want to see?
Yeah, I do think it's interesting because I can kind of get to like why why The Conjuring like doesn't do it for me.
Yeah. Why Malignant does,
or Malignant does, or Antlers doesn't, or whatever, right? I there's a pretty wide range of like what's horror, and you have the distinction even of like horror thriller, like when is it, when is it one, when is it the other? Yeah. Is there really a distinction in there? And I do think that what I don't want, I guess I'll just go there. What I don't want is the movie that's just trying to jump scare you, or even just like, or to scare you, almost just like telling a story at the campfire.
I was just going to say, is it the camp counselor that turns to you and says, but the thing wasn't there, and the flashlight's on their face, and you're like, right, big fucking deal. Like, yeah, why do I
exactly. Care? Right. The intent is to shock. There's no intent to say anything or do anything new or try anything out there or whatever. It really is like, all right, we're just going to put together the formula we know makes people like jump and go, ah.
Yeah.
And I think that I was thinking about this because we were talking about, with the horror movie or whatever. And I kind of was like, I think there is an audience that wants to believe, quote unquote, and wants to be jump scared.
Yep.
Right. You go with your girlfriend, you sit there, she eeks and leans into you.
Yep.
I don't know, I'm talking about 1950s B movies or The Conjuring. But right, that's like one part of it, and then the other is that like so many people, I don't think they really legitimately believe it. I do think people legitimately believe in supernatural, but I don't think they legitimately buy that like The Conjuring was true, like that specific thing was 100% true, or like the Annabelle movie was 100% true. But I do think that they like want to believe that conceptually, and so they're going like very open-minded, so to speak, into it, wanting to believe that, and then wanting to kind of get a little bit scared.
It's creepy. It can give you that creepy feeling if you just believe it a little bit.
Right.
But then when you don't want to, you can like be like, no, I don't believe that.
But then like, it's okay. You just go home and then you never think about the movie again. It doesn't give you nightmares.
Yeah.
It gives kids nightmares. Like it's enough that like a little kid sees it and gets fucked up. Right, I guess it would be that level of scary.
Yeah, exactly. They would be like, oh my God, that could be real. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I saw Ernest Scared Stupid, and that shit scared me stupid. Like, it was the worst. And my dad was like, it's a dumb comedy. And I was like, no, the troll is just stealing children's souls.
Fucked up. Yeah.
It's fucked up, dude.
That's one of those things they didn't think through for little kids.
They were like, it's going to be funny. Nobody cares.
But even, with slasher movies, Halloween tries to say something. And there's a lot of interesting things about the somewhat, you talked about the camp counselor looking at you. Yeah. Halloween does have a bit of the like classical, like the babysitter's alone, and it's like Scream obviously copped this kind of feel or whatever, but it plays into that. And then also tries to tell like these more complicated thoughts about like evil and stopping it, and like there's some interesting things to talk about and see, the like stalking aspects of how Carpenter like shoots it and where you see him. Friday the 13th is fucking, it took a dime to make that movie, and it is absolutely was just shat out. But the effects work and the new like camera work, the way they did the sound, like that's all new at that time, and that makes that really interesting.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I can appreciate that in the same way, even though I know that like it essentially was created like the Conjuring movies, like the creation of it was totally to make a jump, and it absolutely was like, what's Halloween was a thing. What's a day we can name our thing after?
Yes. How could we make a possible day? 13 is a bad number. Fuck it. Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. Yeah, that is awesome. So I think that even there, where something can sort of accidentally back into some brilliance, I can appreciate it. But I do much more prefer something that has any kind of psychological twist to it. And so like Silence of the Lambs is just a fucking perfect movie.
Yeah.
And a creepy movie, and it has a bit enough of that, like, it kind of could happen feel to it. Honestly, even the first Halloween has enough, it kind of could happen
the
feel to
breathing
it.
and the mask, like the POV stuff gives you that like instillment that like there could be somebody out there. The handheld footage of it all feels so grounded in how it can come through. So you're like,
and I'm okay with some supernatural, like it could happen, you know, here and there. Like I'm not opposed to that. Like when it sort of is on the science fiction line, I guess.
Yeah. You're like, okay, there we go.
I guess Frankenstein could be real.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where I think it comes down, for me anyway, making like a good horror film is making not just a creature that's believable, but one that like I don't want to believe in, that I don't want to believe is real.
Yeah.
Something that like makes you claw it. Like there's no way that could happen. Like the moment you go into denial, you've like lost and you're in a state where you're like, I hope that that's not a real thing. Like when I see a ghost movie, like it's Conjuring or any other shit, really the only thing in a Conjuring movie that makes me scared or nervous, and even like Pixar's Toy Story did this for me, is that sentience exists somewhere that I don't expect it. Like I remember negotiating with my Buzz Lightyear toy when I like saw Toy Story and then thought about it. And I was like, dude, like I swear, if you're alive, you can like let me know. It's totally chill. I'm not going to fuck with you. Like, please just don't fuck me up. Like any way you can, please just don't. But like, that's kind of like where my head's at when it comes to a good horror from a grounded standpoint. The other thing I wanted to talk about is because we're talking about like how applicable it is in a contemporary point. Like, can you believe in Michael Myers? Can you believe in these other characters from a grounded standpoint? Then I feel like there's a backlash culturally that happened where people were like, well, those are all like entertainment. Those are popcorn flicks. Those are slashers. When it becomes like a slasher, when it becomes a genre that's about how the murder's conducted, then people like denigrate it and they reduce it. And then people start talking about elevated horror. And I've seen enough rants about elevated horror and like how it's used. And I think that it's really a misnomer. There's like social commentary within horror. There's metaphors within horror. There's politics to be had. And I think that there's just kind of like a general, does this have a metaphor or not? Is this entertainment value or does it have something to say? And it's always blended. But it's fascinating to me that like more recent than not, people are like A24 is elevated horror and everything else is like schlock. It's like,
like denigrates everything else.
Yeah. And I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah. There definitely is that backlash to where the slashers of the 80s and then the boom of Stephen King movies.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an author that has had more adaptations than Stephen King.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
unless we're saying like, if you count, they had the same adaptation of the same story multiple times, and then maybe Charles Dickens,
Shakespeare, and Charles
Shakespeare's
Dickens,
there. Yeah,
you're like, all right, here we go.
But I think of like independently distinct movies that are adaptations. I think Stephen King probably can't be touched, and I also think that led to the backlash because those are a gambit from The Shining
Overdrive
to Maximum Overdrive.
Oh my God, that's true. It's very true.
And so you have that boom in the 90s, right? You have the 80s and 90s. You have this uptick in slashers. The slashers by the 90s are on like 10, 11, right? They're going to hell. They're coming back from the dead. They're going to space.
Yeah.
That technically Jason X was the 2000s, but
it still counts.
You get it. Yeah. And then the Scream movies had come out, and the first Scream movie is a great horror movie and also a great, like, simultaneously send up and dig at slasher movies.
And I chose that line very carefully. It walks that line with grace.
Yeah. It kind of brought everybody into like, maybe those aren't so great. Maybe
it's kind of amazing that there's like 6 Scream movies, and each one of them is pretty much the exact same, but it's able to reflect the current horror medium, like
right.
the current
Yeah,
like
kinda,
state of the
yeah.
horror genre, and it kind of gets away with what it's doing by doing that.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I think you have all those like Stephen King and Stephen King copies that just got flooded out for a bit. And I think that, yeah, the 2000s was just sort of as like a backlash initially to those. And we see a bunch of those franchises finally fell off. They're
Yeah.
coming back now, right? In these reboot, remakes,
Hellraiser
sequels
on
that
Hulu
ignore
and-
sequels. Yeah,
Yeah.
sequels that ignore sequels or TV show versions of them or whatever. But for a while, yeah, that all lay dormant, and there was this like a good movie to come out, right? Good horror movie to come out.
Yeah.
But I think that's because I often when people talk about horror, I do kind of say like, do you mean jump scare or slasher, or do you mean like the horror genre? Because I think the horror genre has been there and been good all along.
Yeah.
There's just so many different things, and it just became entangled with people's minds that it was.
Yeah, it is significantly easier to make a horror film than like any other genre, except for maybe a drama. But like horror, in terms of
do, like,
being
a
able to get
one-room
like
drama?
profit, I guess, and in terms of
Yeah.
able to
Yeah.
get people interested, I would watch a horror movie over a drama, because a drama is cameras set up in a room, and you really have to rely on your actors. Horror is, what do we got prosthetically, fake blood, other things to like shock and awe or like draw a visual contrast. And like horror movies can play more with gel lights and like other fucking atmospheric things than a drama is supposed to, unless you're going surreal. But it's fascinating to think about. Like, I've seen a number of independent horror movies at this point in my Schlocktober career and otherwise. And to me, like, the thing that really makes it is when the director has, I wouldn't say it's like a vision for what the metaphor or the meaning of the movie is, but they have just a vision and how they want to convey the horror. Like, it is a feeling that they can get through to you. Like a slasher is an insecurity of you're not safe in these contexts. Giallo is its own thing. That's a Pulp Fiction thing. It's fucking... I don't think that any kind of, we talked about Tenebrae at one point on here. That was way more of like, here's some commentary happening within it. But I really don't think that anybody's worried about a coat rack of diamonds falling on them and stabbing them in the face.
There certainly is the exploitation angle of horror at the very, very bottom.
Yeah. And so you have those aspects, but then like you can play with what ifs. There's plenty of thoughts that are just chilling that you can explore, that don't require like a high budget. You don't have to have necessarily a monster. You just have to have the right pacing and the right way that you tell the story. And you can do something that, if you have the right kind of production. I think A24, again, I mentioned them earlier, but even just if you look at Talk to Me without any kind of social commentary or anything, or like this metaphor on grief or any of that, it just has like really effective visual work in it. And it's all done by a bunch of teenagers or college kids that are grabbing what is basically like a mannequin's hand, and it's got like a bunch of different handwriting on it. They give it like this creepy mystique about it. Maybe it was bought by a gypsy, maybe somebody had this, whatever the fuck it is, it channels ghosts, and those ghosts are freaky as fuck, and they do weird shit, and they take over your body. And like, that's like solid horror. That's creepy beyond what your mind can envision. That gives me that denial feeling of like, that can't be true. I don't want that. No way.
Yeah. Well, and you can shoot like Funny Games is just all in one house, honestly, just like in the living room.
Yeah.
For like 99% of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's, it's a horror movie for sure. That's an interesting one because that's definitely like a playing with tropes. But yeah, and I think that backlash in the 2000s, you have some movies I think that pop up that start kind of this like elevated feeling of like, oh, there could be some more.
Yeah.
The movies that did exist, but I think they got that in like the 80s and 90s, like I mentioned Silence of the Lambs. I think if I say like, oh, horrors in the 90s, people don't necessarily think of that. There's like, that was there and that was excellent. And that's exactly what like A24 would want to put out.
Yeah.
Like totally. Yeah. And so you have some that pop up like, Japanese horror came over. We had that adaptation of The Ring, and I think that had a big impact in the States, and The Grudge. they were very different. They were very creepy and something else. And they have something to say. I really like both versions of Ringu and Ring. The American Grudge, not so much.
Yeah, sure. Make that mention.
Yeah, but also a bunch of shit came out, like the Final Destination movies. Like there were the start of new shitty franchises in the 2000s, but they were fresh,
and
but they were kind of the same thing.
Fun now. They're like really fun and like Final Destination as a franchise is the like Zucker brothers of horror movies for me, where you're like, where's the punchline? Like, I'm waiting for it. And then you're like, that guy fucking got it. Or like, oh yeah, of course that's how it would happen. Yeah, definitely. That's, I feel like that's what it was always meant to be. It's just dumb otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Like to believe that death has some personification or grudge.
Yeah, again, like that one sort of, it has something to say, and it's interesting, this like fate and whatnot about it.
Yeah,
the like way that people die is like comical. The like Rube Goldberg setups that death goes to the trouble to get people with is
they
funny. They
always misdirect you. Way.
It's not as bad in the first movie. Like there's enough that it kind of is just playing with you, but by the like more recent, whatever the last one was, it just is utter nonsense.
Yeah.
But I think you also had a bunch of those low budget, like obviously Blair Witch had a huge impact, and in general, indie movies had this big impact. I feel like in the early 2000s, you have like Fox Searchlight and shit like this. There was this boom of the indies that now is like all of the good movies are indies now, right?
Yeah.
Like 28 days later.
Yeah.
That was cheap, and was a zombie movie and was like felt like a more expensive zombie movie. And so then I think there was this like, oh, they earn it with their right, like they're on a $5 million budget and look at this awesome thing they made in the woods with the cameras and
yeah.
They're just kids or whatever.
Yes, there's some Vince McMahon-esque producer out there that's just like, what do you got? What do you got for me? Give me a horror movie. What does it look like?
You just set up a camera in front of your bed and leave it on all the time.
God, he's gonna hurl. He's gonna puke. Like, oh God. Yeah, like there's like, people, it's weird because it feels like indie horror is trying to constantly outrun itself. And that's because I guess like at bigger scale franchises, you have the tropes. Even if you don't have the tropes, fuck it. You have the branding and the character. Like Freddy has so many rules throughout the entire Nightmare on Elm Street franchise that just change. Just fuck it.
Yeah.
Jason, same thing. Michael Myers or not Michael Myers. Who gives a shit? Halloween was made and now you're going. I'm sure there's Talk to Me. There's like Talk for Me. Talk 3 Me or some shit. Who gives a shit? Megan 3, Mithrigan.
No, but no, Megan's good. Let's not.
I'm not going to say that they're.
We only have
bullshit.
one movie in that franchise. That's right. Great. Let's see how the second one goes.
When we get McForgan or whatever it is, then we'll see. Which wouldn't even make sense, but okay. Then we'll see like where it goes.
I wrote it for them. They can go back and listen. I gave them the plot.
You just get like this in most horror, like It Follows. Doesn't It Follows have a sequel coming out soon? I think.
Oh yeah, probably right.
Where it's like another good, like They Follow
excellent.
Or some shit.
Yeah, you're right.
Like,
yeah, They Follow.
Okay, here we go. We've established the initial rules. But most other indie horror, it just has to be like a simple concept. You have to be like day to day in your life. What is something that you're fucking terrified of? That you'd never expect. And it can't be a man on the walls anymore. We've done that too many times. It has to be like, oh, there's a demon and you can't see them and they do this thing. Like Smile is getting a sequel now, and that's all about people smiling creepily because there's something that compels them to before they kill themselves in front of you. There's a trauma.
I think more recently we've seen a move away from, like you said, it's less like, oh, there's a demon or a ghost, or it's more of like, we're not going to explain it. Like It Follows, obviously. Yeah. It follows as STDs, but like, it's not explained, right? Like what exactly it is. And that's kind of what makes it creepy, is not having that understanding or explanation.
You end up
versus
getting...
you go back, I think before the like slasher boom, really pre-war, and it's classic.
We have to explain everything
vampires.
to you.
Yeah, we have to explain it, but it's also sort of like classic old tales, old myth built on, right? Of like vampires and the mummy and like things like that.
So
and
like
it's more straightforward. Yeah.
Yeah, I just watched 1971's Werewolf versus the Vampire Woman, which is a Spanish schlock film. It was my day one Schlocktober. And the opening 3 minutes of the it has a cold open, Ryan.
Oh boy.
Where a dead body is brought into this lab, and these two doctors stand over it. One of them's like, "Oh my God, look at his chest!" And there's like a crudely drawn pentagon. It's not even, he says it's a pentagram, but it's a fucking pentagon. And he's like, "Oh my God, that's the mark of a werewolf." Like scientifically, that is the mark of a werewolf. And he's like, and he's also got 3 silver bullets. And the other doctor's like, "Get out of the way. I'm going to take those bullets out." And he's like, "No, don't do that. It'll bring him back if he's a werewolf." And he's like, "Shut up. You don't know what you're doing." Takes the bullets out, and then the werewolf comes back.
Oh my God.
And he starts murdering people. Like in that cold open, he just murders people, and it establishes that's the rules of how a werewolf lives. And likewise, it does the same for the fucking vampire. It makes a whole deal out of, they unearth her grave and they take out the silver cross that was stabbing her. And then they accidentally pour blood into her mouth because somebody gets cut. And now she's back. And you're like, all right, I guess I have all the evidence that I need to believe these fantastical creatures can live and be here. Sure, why not? Fuck it.
Yeah.
And that's like old world horror.
Yeah, it does feel like movies don't have somewhat realized they don't have to tell us shit. They can just sort of like start and like do their thing.
They can just go.
You don't need to worry too much about,
It doesn't matter.
Whenever they finally figured out they didn't need to kill Batman or Spider-Man's family, they're like, we
they
know
don't
it.
have to show us that trauma. Yeah, it's kind of wild how much story needs to be told. And that points out, like, beyond just horror, how much exposition people feel like you need to have. They equate exposition with emotional investment and depth. And so when you have something like Nightmare on Elm Street or like the first Nightmare on Elm Street, I feel like is so good. There's just so much to it that is terrifying, where it's like you just can't fall asleep. We're trying to figure out the rules as we're going. And then we get into the second one, it's so murky and weird. And they're like, maybe Freddy's just the scary part of it. Or like, maybe it's a metaphor, or like maybe these things. And then by the third one, they're like the dream people or whatever.
Yeah, they fly off the rails.
They're just like, yeah, fuck it.
Yeah, he can be reborn into, it's pretty off the rails.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that there's something to having rules and playing with those.
Yeah.
But also not needing to necessarily explain things. Like, it follows there's a rule that you follow, or like Ring. There's some rules. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, like, how did she get onto the videotape?
Fuck it. Don't care.
Who was the first one to get it followed? How did Freddy get into your dreams? Like, it, right? Like,
hand wave. Don't matter.
We don't necessarily need that, right? Yeah. It's just more about like,
we don't need the midichlorians, George Lucas.
No, yeah,
we just need the Force. Okay, it's fine.
Yeah. There is this like inherent scariness to night and falling asleep and weird dreams and like, what are they, right? And so it's like you just play off of that. Like, you give something, to that. Exactly. It is really creepy to see naked old people just out of your view.
Everybody knows that. It's just terrifying.
Everyone's seen that and been freaked out, right? It's just...
Yeah. They know how to make creepy visuals, and that's like the thing. Like, I just went and saw The Substance recently, and that's body horror, which I'm not as big on. Like, and by big, I mean I haven't seen a whole lot of body horror. I haven't watched a whole lot of Cronenberg, but like The Substance, somebody walked out of that fucking theater when I was in it. Like a girlfriend and boyfriend just walked out because they couldn't handle what they were seeing, because I feel like that's a different aspect of horror people aren't used to anymore. It's out there, but people try not to seek it out. It almost makes me think of most of conventional horror, like the jumping. When I say conventional, I mean like jump scares, like spooky clown, whatever. The Halloween decor. It is in line with like Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of like roller coaster rides. It has that like, I want to go to a movie and I want the loud sting. I want to, and I want to see like kind of a creepy face that looks kind of human, but not really. But I don't want to see a human morph into some other shit. Like, fuck that. I don't, the body's gross. I don't want to know about that. But I feel like that's like the cool aspect of horror is what it can show you.
Yeah. I think that those that try to really unsettle you are interesting and are able to pull it off more so than the ones that know like, oh, we just hit this music sting and we do this thing at this time, and that it cheaply pulls a thread.
Triggers your Pavlovian reflex.
As far as Cronenberg, when I was trying to figure out what to watch this October, I was realizing I hadn't watched Scanners. I've previously seen The Fly, Cronenberg's The Fly, which is like, it's again, I was like science fiction horror, like The Line.
Yeah.
Maybe Scanners is, I don't know. Probably like, I don't know. But yeah, like there is that bit, but it definitely turns into like body horror, like fucked up horror in The Fly as that movie goes on and gets uncomfortable. Scanners was interesting because I was actually kind of surprised not having watched that. I was kind of caught off guard. Like, I know people's heads explode because that's what you see, and those are the like memes and whatever. But I didn't like know exactly what it was about other than like telepathic people. Yeah. That movie so quickly gets to a way too detailed head exploding that it caught me off guard. But that was good. Like, that legitimately was like, oh fuck. Like, I didn't think
there's
like
some real
we were
shit
doing
happening.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought that was coming later.
Yeah. That's the one scene that I always remember from it, and I haven't seen it in a few years, but that sequence, they're like at a press conference or some shit, right? And like,
they're like,
just fucking explodes a lot. You're like,
they're like, we're gonna reveal to the world about Scanners, and they invite like the people of like the government and scientists or whatever. And then they have Michael Ironsides and a scanner sit in front of them, and he's gonna read Michael Ironside's mind, but then his head they kind of like wiggle their heads at each other. And the guy's head fucking explodes.
You're like, is this part of the routine? Like, how does this even? And it's like not the horror. I think that in that instance, it's not the horror that you're used to thinking about, because again, like a contemporary horror is loud noise, spooky ghosts, like these other things. I think that in that instance, the scanner head explosion it's a trauma. Like, you're seeing a visual trauma. You're like, they're trying to get to that hyper real focus of like, what would a head look like if it exploded?
Right.
And you're just kind of like, holy shit, what the fuck did I just see? Like that moment.
And you're legitimately caught off guard, right? Like you didn't have there's an anticipation in the jump scare. Like, that's what makes it work.
You can feel it building.
Right? Yeah.
Like, oh,
Shaggy
God.
and Scoopy are sneaking along tiptoe, and when they get to the door, right? Or whatever. But yeah, that one is just like, it happens and it's shocking. I would say, like, as far as jump scares that were meant to be jump scares, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 had a jump scare that legit got me. Like, I really don't get got by them. Yeah, but that one's like surprised me because it was absolutely like he came out of a place he wasn't supposed to be in, that you weren't paying attention to. Like, it wasn't set up. Like, none of it was set up.
Because like the interaction that you're experiencing is so engrossing. Like, I remember it's like his brother like talking to the radio DJ.
Right.
And like backing
it's like
her
fucked
into
up
a
and
corner,
weird.
and you're like, this is a fucking uncomfortable situation. And little do you know, right behind him is like the fucking like record hall, and it's just in black, and like Leatherface is there. Like,
just comes out of fucking nowhere at full speed. Yeah. And it's like, oh shit. Like that, and that's cool. Cause that evokes the actual feeling that the jump scare is supposed to get of, you're in your basement and something fucking falls over and you jump, right? Like, you're like, what the fuck is in here with me?
Yep.
That true surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we've talked at a little bit of length about, what makes like or at least our preferences for like a conventional horror, like what we want to see now in a contemporary grounding. Are there any like horror movies that you're planning to watch in October? Things that like, now that you've gone through, your Friday the 13th, your Halloweens. You're at the bottom of the barrel here, Ryan. What are you going to do?
I am at the bottom of the barrel. Yeah, I think there are newer horror movies I need to catch up with. The reason I watch Scanners is there sometimes where something pops up and I'm like, oh fuck, I never watched that.
Yep.
That I know I need to go back and catch. So that's like I try to look around and I really didn't hit that. Yeah, you and I were talking about Puppet Master because there's the other angle I have is like still going down the like, why does this exist angle? Especially something like that, which probably was already off the rails when it started. It's interesting to look at, to just be like, how did this get made? How did this mini get made? But I'm not particularly interested in, some of the shit that just comes out every year that I know is just passed away. And even these things that are like sequels to franchises that I like, it just feels like now stuff comes out and I'm like, why?
Yeah, like
why do we need a sequel? Yeah, why did that need a sequel now of all times? What the fuck does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, it's like the demand. That's where I feel like a lot of it takes the name brand recognition takes over for what would be good storytelling. Like I like a horror movie. For my preference, I like a horror movie one that puts me in that state of denial where I'm like, there's no way this could be true. But I also like a horror movie that makes me have that kind of like, oh, if it is going to be a sequel, it's going to have some kind of like good social commentary. I'm talking about like the Halloween movies now, which are like way too ham-fisted and just kind of like, I don't need that. But like It Follows is a great example of a horror movie I really liked that it doesn't need to say a whole lot other than like it latches onto a particular social concern and makes it into something bigger. Or like The Babadook has this sort of semblance of like, here's what grief can do to you and these things. I love that, as opposed to when a Hollywood exec is like, people just like Pennywise the Clown, let's make a TV series about him, even though we made him fucking 2 movies and there already was a TV series. We don't need to do Welcome to Derry. It's fine. We don't just do something else. Like, for the love of God.
Something new, please. Yeah. And I like, even for some of those more recent things, it's taken me a while to get to them because I wait on horror movies now because I'm like, I just don't trust it. Yeah. Because I do feel like it is an easy cash grab, and even these like shitty sequels made enough money to keep justifying dragging the name through the mud. But yeah, like definitely in my mind, I'm sure we've mentioned Get Out a ton, and I think I just brought it up earlier in this episode, but I didn't watch it right away, and I think it was a few years, but it had been enough buzz for long enough that I was like, all right, I got to give it a shot. And then I watched it and I was like, this is fucking excellent. This is one of the best fucking movies in years. I don't think it necessarily is like revitalizing horror because I don't think it went away. I don't think it got bad. I think people just paid attention to the bad ones and didn't pay enough attention to the good things that were there. Midsommar. That was another one that, again, I just had some time and I was like, oh, I want to watch this. Like, I've heard about. Mainly it was like, I've heard about Hereditary. Yes. And I was like, well, I'll watch this because I've also heard someone about that. And then I was fucking obsessed. That was like one of the, like, made me uncomfortable, like sitting there watching it. Hilariously, I had a camera for my security camera or what up that was in my house, but I'd set it up to watch the kids on Christmas. Sorry if I just ruined Christmas for you. And I realized after I had watched that I was like, oh shit, it can probably see me sitting on the couch watching the movie. And I went back and I like fast forwarded through myself, like uncomfortably watching it. And you could just see the point where I like kind of just like curl up enough to be like, I don't like where this is going.
Yeah. The body language changed.
And it was definitely a movie that I thought about afterwards. I was like disappointed in Hereditary. Like, I don't know, maybe if I'd seen it first or it hadn't been so hyped up. I don't know.
I think Hereditary is a little too hyped. But
yeah, It Follows is another one I waited. I also probably watched. The best way to watch that is while someone else is driving through the desert of New Mexico. Watch it with some headphones on. That's a really bad way to watch that.
Whew, man.
The music really like drives it in.
So
I think I just like I wait, and then it's a few years later. So there's probably a few that they're not coming to my mind right now that are probably on the like last few years, and I'm kind of waiting to see how, when the dust settles, what sort of sticks around, and then I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, that's where I feel like it's multifaceted. When you get to horror as a genre, it spills over into other mediums in a way that I won't say like all other genres do, but it's easier to access like that kind of feeling that horror should get in something like video games, which are way more personal. They're way more of like, I think about like, we just talked about Silent Hill recently when we were talking about Audition and the vibes that it gave us. But like the Silent Hill demo that they had for Kojima's game, which
that's fucking
conjures so much. Even just watching the footage of that game is in and of itself a horror movie that like, I remember a friend of mine watched me play it and he asked if we could stop. Like I didn't say we should stop, but he was like, please, I can't. Like, I just don't want to. And I think that speaks to sort of the power that horror can ripple through into other things. And like, you have comics or like manga, like Junji Ito, which you and I have talked about a little bit. They have a new adaptation from Adult Swim.
One episode out. I thought about watching it.
I watched it,
I'm gonna wait.
And I will say, so far, optimistic. I really liked it compared to the other Junji Ito adaptations. I feel like they finally nailed it. Like they might. I'm hopeful that they've nailed it. But the first episode was really fucking creepy and really disturbing in the best way possible.
So Ito has had I feel like he's had a resurgence. I see a lot more stuff, English adaptations of it. I go to the Kinokuniya bookstores. There's one there in Austin. There's 2 here in LA, maybe 3. I know of 2. And I like buy stuff online or whatever, but they're like a Japanese bookstore from Japan. Yeah. No, there's 3. Yeah, never mind. I don't know why I need to tell you how many there are, but there are 3.
You're compelled to do it.
But at all the ones that I've been to, even recently, there's like a Junji Ito table.
Yeah.
with the stuff, because like kids these days, I guess, are consuming that, but that it's had that staying power. I do think it's a bit like it's like nothing else, which is why it's been so hard to adapt.
Yeah.
I feel like this recent one, at least what I saw in trailers and looking at what the animation studio is doing, the animation is enough off the walls, unsettling to bring the right vibes. And I think it being in black and white is right.
Yes.
Choice too.
I would agree that makes it everything, because the other Junji Itos were in color, and that kind of ruins the atmosphere for what they could do and how they would do it.
But Ito has that like H.R. Geiger uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
There's just some people can just design stuff and you're just like, I don't like it. I can just look at one image and be like, I don't like this.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan. It is interesting now that you bring that up, because like Giger does like biological body horror sort of things, like in his works, you can see it. Any of that, it's bioorganic, like metals and machines. It's this weird melding of like human enforced structures, but like the messiness of what a body or an organism would be. And that just disturbs you to your core. You're like, ugh, I don't even fucking know how that works, and I don't want to. It's just gross to look at. And Ito takes like simplistic concepts and blows them up into like this disproportionate fear, like his Uzumaki having, the spirals, like somebody seeing spirals everywhere, and it becoming something that actually, like, the concept of a spiral warping your physical body and like what that does to your bones is terrifying to think about. Or the fucking story that he has about the mountain that has the holes that nobody knows how they got there, but they're the perfect image for different people, and they all see themselves in them, and they're just compelled to walk deeper into it until you get stuck, and like fucking just that unknown element. And it's not like, I can think of like conspiracy theorists could explain like so much, but not like Giger or Ito's horror. I don't think that they would have any explanation of why that would be a thing.
Yeah. There's I feel like Ito's stuff almost leans on the like H.P. Lovecraft level of like an unexplainable, unspeakable,
mind-bending horror.
Fucking horror. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would agree. Like there's that bit of it. And I feel like that's what Cronenberg also kind of reaches into, is like, you don't need to know how it works. You just need to know that it's terrifying and it can grow you in these different ways. And and there's like, there may be a metaphor behind it. There may not be, but one thing is for certain, it is creepy first and foremost. And after you've experienced that kind of unsettling, then you can start to ask yourself why it's unsettling, and it starts to peel back like layers of why you might think it's creepy, why it does what it should do, why the horror works for you.
Yeah.
But yeah,
like for Cronenberg, like The Fly, you could say it is just like a relationship going poorly, like in a person's obsession, like going too far, and the body horror is just like on top of it to make it uncomfortable.
Yeah. But
and I feel like some of that, I don't know that I can do that with Scanners. I don't think I can easily.
It's hard to do with Scanners. It's hard to do with a lot of things where you're
away.
like, where the feeling, like it becomes hard to separate that line. And I think that's where sort of that blending, like we were talking about earlier with the difference between like an elevated horror and entertainment, quote unquote horror. I would say it's probably like what the assumed is that you have horror and elevated horror, and like, why the fuck would you have horror that's elevated? But really what an elevated horror translates to is like horror that has a clearer message, has a clearer metaphor. But I feel like horror in general, it's supposed to delve into parts of your psyche. It's supposed to make you ask those questions of like, why is this happening? And you can say like, oh, it's schlock, it's a slasher, whatever. But like Scanners isn't necessarily elevated horror. It is an experience into a different kind of like body horror, like a different, what if these powers existed and how would they impact you? And what the fuck even is this supposed to be about? Like, you could kill people with thoughts or those kind of things. And I think that that's just a deeper concept exploration. And it's being able to follow those abstract thoughts. And I think that that's what horror is really about. Like drama explores processing of like grounded trauma in discussion, and then you have characters interacting with each other. Everybody has drama with each other. And everybody kind of relates to some core nugget of a drama. But in a horror, you're alone, you're isolated in it. When you talk to your friends about what you experience in a horror film, it's different than if you were to talk about, I watched Marriage Story. You're going to have a totally different discussion. If you're talking about It Follows, or the pieces that really creeped you out, are going to speak to who you are as a person and what you're afraid of and what you feel. And I felt like when I got out of The Substance, which is, it's a body horror film, but it is very much about personal, like it's vanity. It's all about personal vanity, but also the societal pressures that impose that upon us. And when I got out of it, I was just like, I know a few people that would resonate way more with this. Like they might see it as way more of a horror film than I did. I laughed. I thought it was funny and satirical, but I know other people that would take it seriously because they would be like, oh my God, what the fuck? Like that is my nightmare kind of thing. So I feel like that's where horror is more faceted, and prepared to let you explore and reflect on yourself. Drama is supposed to just show you like an empathetic scenario, in my opinion, anyway. But
I think you usually walk away from a drama being, like it's realistic. It could happen, and it doesn't bother you that it could happen.
Yeah, it's almost like being told a story by somebody else.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that your friend did that? No, that's fucked up. Like,
and a horror movie, it's bothers you that it that it could happen, or if it couldn't happen, it's unexplainable, but it touches a spot where you're like, I wouldn't want that to be a possibility. Like,
yeah,
I don't want to think about it. Right. It bothers me too much. You walk away very unsettled.
Yeah, exactly.
Which actually, like, I feel like some true crime stuff does to me now, but there are definitely true crime things I walk away from and I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, I don't feel good about that.
Yeah, it just feels bad. I mean, you talked about that documentary recently. It's not necessarily true crime, but technically it's true crime perpetuated by the medical industry.
Yeah, true. But yeah, no, that was like definitely like, it's an unsettling, it can happen. And I think that's where the edge, I guess, is we all know that there's fucked up shit in our future.
Yeah.
But this is something that like the human consciousness does a really good job of like disregarding and ignoring in order to get you through your day, your life, your year, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like, we all know someone we know is going to die, and we all know we're going to die.
Yeah.
And we also know there's going to be just some pain and suffering, like in our lives and the people around us, just whatever. It's just, unescapable. Fucking car crashes.
Dude, it could just happen. It
could just happen.
People being like, I just talked to that. There's even a scene in which I watched Cyberpunk 2077 or the 2076, whatever the fuck, Edge Runners recently. And like, there's a whole scene in one of the episodes where one of the characters is like, that was my mom and she died. And like another character's like, what the fuck? I just talked to her like 2 days ago. Like even in that medium to have that exchange between characters, which is kind of comedic in a way because the circumstances impose it, but it's tragic and dramatic. And it demonstrates that like, yeah, things can actually change that fast. And like humans aren't ready for it. Like even in a science fiction future where we can predict so much more, we have brain chips and shit, like that sudden snap where somebody dies and you weren't expecting it can just be like, oh God, I don't know how to deal with that.
And I think it's that uncomfortableness that seeps in there. I think the same thing with the reason the body horror works, whether it's just that. I think there's also that like level of violence that we know is out there.
Yeah.
Like, animals like level, or we know like as humans, like we're perpetrating indirectly.
Yeah.
That we know is out there, but we typically don't see day to day. And like you said, with scanners, it's like, what would it look like if someone's head exploded? Which is a thing that has happened.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and not like one time. I'm like, right. But you're not confronted by it.
Yeah. You don't need to know about self-immolation or any of those things. I mean, like the closest I can think of to being like bridging that gap of animal and human, like slaughter is like No Country for Old Men with Javier Bardem taking that cattle fucking killer around and hitting it on people's heads. You're like, holy shit, putting him down just like other animals. That's insane to think about. Was there any other, we're kind of running over on time here. I feel like we could talk forever about what makes a good horror genre. Just keep rolling back around to different things. Is there anything in particular, Ryan, that you're targeting to watch in October? Any movie that you're like, yeah, I got to catch up on that. That's the one I'm going to see. Or
yeah, I think it is one of those things where it's like once something goes by and I'm like, fuck, I meant to watch that. Like then I'll try to scramble to do it. Yeah, so like Scanners popped up and then I'm like, oh man, I never watched Videodrome. So I'm like, there's definitely like a couple like Cronenberg things and I'm probably going to go down a Cronenberg path. You brought up Puppet Master and I certainly wasn't thinking about Puppet Master.
Now you are.
Now I'm thinking about Puppet Master.
Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
Yeah. Which opens up the door. There was, there's some other like horrible long running
Spookies. You're gonna check out Spookies?
No. Oh man. Yeah. And then I think that with horror, it's just when I am in the mood. That's the other thing too, is the reason a lot of times I miss out on the opportunity to watch horror because Darla's like okay with it. She really likes the Nightmare on Elm Street. Like that was something she grew up with. And when I was like, hey, I'm going to watch some Nightmare on Elm Street movies. She's like, yeah, sure. Like anytime. Like,
yep.
Up for those. I think because she's confronted that enough, like over and over that it's
she's
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I've watched Seven way too many times.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't have
you already know what's in the box.
Just watch it. I know it's a good movie. Yeah. Or Silence of the Lambs. That ends up being kind of the thing that typically I seek out when I'm like on a business trip or the family's out of town, that I'll be like, all right, let's crack open a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like I was Midsommar, which I was like, I don't think Darla would like that.
Yep.
She didn't like Hereditary, so I think it kind of proves it.
Well, there you go. Yeah. That kind of proof is in pudding there.
Yeah. So I've been using Halloween and this podcast as an excuse to watch horror movies in October. Usually.
Hey, as you should. I definitely could use probably more horror movies in my Schlocktober lineup, but I feel like I'm doing well enough. I'm gonna find something, one way or another. It's not gonna be great, but hey, it's gonna be worth talking about, I suppose.
There's always more schlock.
Always. It never stops.
Oh yeah, there's like, yeah, I would say back burner things for me. I'm like Bone Tomahawk is on my
Bone
back
Tomahawk
burner.
is definitely on my back burner. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's some things that have just come out that I'm like, I see it and I'm like, and I hear it, the buzz or whatever. And I'm like, all right, it sounds about the right thing. And then I just leave it somewhere in the recess of my mind.
Yep. I am the same. I have the inner contrarian that just says like, hey, don't jump in yet. Don't trust the crowd. Who knows? I'm glad that I betrayed that for both Strange Darling and The Substance. Both of those I loved. I know Dixon did not like Strange Darling. Hopefully he's going to go see The Substance on Friday. So hopefully he likes it. We'll see if he says anything about it. But, yeah, when it comes to like horror, I also need to be in a certain mood. Like even ramping up to watching The Audition, I was like, all right, it's going to be October soon. I got to check this out. We're going to see. That's why I had to kind of stage my first October movie as being werewolf versus vampire woman. So I could just be like, I'm going to watch a good horror movie and then I'm going to watch a bad horror movie and then I'm going to go from there. But yeah, anytime that I've seen something like I watched Alien Romulus, we've talked about it. I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast now. Dixon's also said that it wasn't like, it was fine, but there are parts in that movie where I feel the genuine atmospheric terror that like Alien held, but then there are other parts where it just gets caught up so much in the member berries that it diffuses the horror. And I don't know if people are scared because they're like, oh my God, that's just like the other Alien. That's terrifying to me. Or if they genuinely have become more fan based and are like, wow, that's just like how Terminator 2 is way more action oriented and the Terminator doesn't kill anybody, but he shoots them in the knee and leaves them for medical bills or whatever. Where you're just like, is he a good guy? Everybody just wants him to be one now, whatever. So yeah, like those moments, I applaud practical effects in a horror movie that's trying to conjure the atmosphere. But when you start relying on stings, when there's like dramatic pulls, you kind of lose me. I really like more avant-garde stuff. And so this October, like in addition to what I'm doing for Schlocktober, which is not probably going to have anything that's unsettling, I like recommend checking out The Substance if you can. And beyond that, I'm trying to like catch up on some of the A24 stuff. I know that I was like knocking it a little bit earlier in terms of like it being elevated horror, but A24 does have some really good like existential dread to it. There's like really nice stuff that compared to like studio cranked out bullshit is there. That's good to see.
They can't all be wins.
Yeah, it can't all be wins. Yeah. And I think that that's part of the gamble too, which I'm fine with. I'm happy to watch indie horror films as well and see people try to act, their way out of something, whether it's a paper bag or it actually is real circumstances. You got to roll the dice sometimes and see if you can get somebody genuinely who looks like they're going through something in a scene. And I think that'll latch onto you and be like, oh, fuck, this is terrifying in one way or another.
Yeah. And I think, do you think there are other genres that have such an easy out in being made? Rom-coms comes to mind. Where the formula it's similar, right? There is this like horror formula and there's like a rom-com formula. And that's the reason that there's like just a deluge of shitty, both of those.
Yeah, it depends like how strong your tropes are that you can play to, where they give you the warm fuzzies, like seeing two people, they meet each other and they hate each other. And then they learn that they have something in common. There's something like inherently, I feel like that tickles our social senses where we're like, that's nice. It's nice to know that we're capable of making friends. Just the same way that like horror is capable of sort of like prodding you in that like sensory part of you. That's like, oh my God, I'm paranoid now. Like, no, I don't want that. As opposed to like, I feel like comedy is a lot harder. You have to like hit on certain things that are culturally relevant in comedy. And it's not applicable to all parts of the culture either, because we've all probably seen a conservative comedian versus like a little bit more like liberal or more nihilistic comedian or like all this other stuff where it's just like really what they're trying to say and what they're trying to do can impact how funny or how effective it is. But I feel like rom-coms and horror can they can rest on their laurels if they really want to. And for people who just want to go through the motions, it's perfectly fine. But it's more egregious in other genres. And in sci-fi especially, it's so hard, I feel like, because sci-fi you have to have something that is unbelievable but believable at the same time. And you're like, okay, my brain says that's not possible, but I could see how it is the same kind of trick that horror has, but to an even stronger prosthetic and world building degree. Can't hand wave your way out of some stuff.
I really was thinking about Hallmark movies last Christmas.
Yeah.
And the fact that I talked myself into Air Bud movies says something about how afraid of the formulaic Hallmark movie I was.
You knew exactly what you were in for if you watched the equivalent amount of Hallmark movies that you did.
I could have just straight up made up 30 plots and claimed I watched 30 days of Hallmark, and no one would have known.
Would have questioned any of it. Yeah, at all. It's totally true. Well, I guess that's kind of the beauty of horror, is that everybody thinks something is horrifying in a different way. And so it'll never hit the same kind of formulaic piece that Hallmark will. It can hit stings and you can be like, oh, killing is scary. But I feel like there's some weirdness to each person's idea of what like a horror trope is. That'll end up being like, that's not scary. It's kind of funny, or that is actually terrifying and an interesting twist on something that's established, as opposed to, we had a meet cute and I own a bakery, and here's like the tiny social nuances that are different between that and whatever else.
I will say, it's interesting you like bringing up comedy, because there's a bit of that like individualism. And I think you're right about horror, that it's what hits you, and I can respect that if someone's like, oh, this movie, really got to me, and I can see like Hereditary, I put a dig on it or whatever, but I'm like, I can see where, well, I mean, one, there's some part in that is really fucked up and definitely hit me, but that's not what everybody was talking about. But the parts of it, that they were, I'm like, I can see it. I can respect it. But in the way that comedy, right, can hit differently, but you're right, like romance, it's like formula, it's that works or it doesn't work, but they put them out. But I can definitely respect that people have different, like, this gets to them or that gets to them, because we're all just different spaces on that.
Yeah. And if anybody out there disagrees and thinks that romance has more nuances to it, I'm happy to hear you out in our Discord, at our Twitter, whatever else. Like, we put all the details after.
Just don't choose to use it.
Yeah. Feel free to call us out on it, call me out on it, and let me know what you think is different within the genre. But from where I'm sitting, what I've seen, like, it's one of those things, just like musical biopics. There's really not much to improve upon or make different when it comes to romance. And I'd love to know more about how you could innovate on it.
We're totally open. Post any horror movies that you think we should watch.
Yeah, exactly. Try to scare us. Give us something that's weird. Give us something that's good. We've seen House, though. If you're going to try to give us that kind of weird, but Ryan and I have both seen House already. Yeah. So sorry, that's
it. I was going to say, that's a good example. That and Tetsuo are recent things that were out there that I watched that I was like, fuck yeah. I want that. That's just something else.
So if anybody knows of things that are similar to that you want to recommend, let us know. It'd be great. But for now, we've talked a lot about horror and the horror genre and what makes a good film. We're all trying to look for in the current coming season. I would say if you are interested in following along with me for Schlocktober, you can check out my Twitter, which is John Juan, JonJohn, JeanJuan. It's a lot. But you can follow me there if you dare, and follow along with what I'm watching. We've got quite a bit of a lineup coming up. It's going to be quite a spectrum. Ryan, you're welcome to also join. I'm going to try to figure out ways for us to watch remotely. But I know you're also a busy person.
I usually jump on a couple. I usually get in a couple.
A few things.
Definitely your recaps. Always your recaps.
Yeah. I'm gonna work on my recaps. I'm definitely going. Last year I kind of slacked on it. Didn't have a whole lot of time. Was under a lot of stress. But this year I feel like I can do it. So I'm like ready to recap stuff. But yeah, follow along Schlocktober. Follow us for more spooky season content coming up soon. And thanks for listening, everybody. I've been your host, John Garcia, and with me is
Ryan King. If you have an idea of what shit I should watch in Christmas, you can get it in now, and I can get started.
Yes, he's looking for things to do. Christmas specials. You should really go for like the 90s to 80s VHS Christmas specials, Ryan. Just try to find a batch of them.
They're really
give us the recommendations of like at home from different regions of the United States. I think we're going to need a lot of unity after November.
Yeah, we need something to bring us back around.
But yeah, well, cool. We'll close it out. Thank you all for listening, and thanks for putting up with our spooky bullshit. Ooh, it's extra spooky. Dixon, why aren't you here to emphasize how spooky the bullshit is? Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.